If you're self employed and you've ever been told you don't qualify for a home, even though you're making decent money, this conversation is for you. This is one of the most frustrating moments I see for entrepreneurs, especially Schedule C filers. You're working hard, your business is bringing in an income, you're paying your bills, and on paper, it feels like you're doing everything right. Then you sit down with a lender, and suddenly the answer is no, or not yet, or not for the amount you expected. And the confusion usually comes from this one big disconnect. What feels like income to you is not always what qualifies as income to a mortgage lender. So, today I want to walk through three of the most common factors that prevent self employed entrepreneurs from qualifying for home ownership. These aren't mistakes in the sense of doing something wrong. They're gaps in understanding how your financial information is evaluated when you apply for a mortgage. Once you understand the lens lenders are using, this all starts to make a lot more sense. Now, before we get into the three factors, it's important to understand how lenders actually look at self employed income. They're not always looking at how busy you are, they're not looking at how many clients you have. They're not looking at your best month or your highest deposit, and they're definitely not looking at your hustle. They're looking at documentation. So they're going to be asking you for tax returns. They're looking for consistency and verifiable income that can reasonably be expected to continue. In other words, your tax return becomes your income story. The first major factor that holds entrepreneurs back from qualifying is poor or inconsistent documentation. This shows up lots of different ways. I mean, sometimes it's a tax returns that don't match the profit and loss statement. Sometimes it's bookkeeping that isn't finalized when tax season comes around. Sometimes it's late filings or financial reports that don't tell the same story across all documents. From the lender's perspective, this isn't about assuming anything negative. It's about risk. Underwriters are trained to be conservative. If numbers don't line up cleanly, they default to the lowest and the safest interpretation of those numbers. So, if your profit looks different depending on which document they're reviewing, they're not going to pick the best version. They're going to pick the one that exposes them to the least risk. Messy or inconsistent documentation creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is usually where approvals are going to stall. This is why accurate, complete bookkeeping matters even when everything feels fine. The lender isn't inside your business, so they're relying entirely on the paper trail to understand how stable and sustainable your income really is. Now, the second factor we're going to look at is lack of separation between business and personal finances. Guys, we talk about this all the time. And this one is incredibly common with Schedule C filers, especially in the early years of their business. Income gets deposited wherever it's convenient, expenses get paid from whatever accounts has money at the time, and then transfers happen back and forth without structure. From a day to day standpoint, it works. From a lending standpoint, it creates problems. Mortgage lenders need to be able to trace your income clearly, and they need to see where business income comes in, how consistently it comes in, and whether it can reasonably be expected to continue. When business and personal finances are mixed together, income becomes harder to verify and it becomes harder to explain. It also becomes harder to defend internally when an underwriter has to justify an approval. Separation creates clarity. It's going to allow lenders to follow the money from source to tax return without confusion. Now, when that trail gets muddy, that's when lenders hesitate, not because you did something wrong, but because they're not going to be able to confidently explain what they are seeing and justify approving you. Now, the third factor blocking your approval is aggressive write offs. This is often the most painful one to hear because writing off business expenses is legal, it's appropriate, and it's smart in many cases. The issue isn't the deductions themselves, the issue is the strategy without any context. Taxable income is what mortgage lenders use to determine how much home you can afford. So when deductions reduce your taxable income all the way down or close to zero, your qualifying income shrinks with it. Now, this is where people get stuck because the IRS rewards lower taxable income, but mortgage lenders reward higher stable income. Those two systems, they're not aligned. When entrepreneurs focus solely on minimizing taxes without considering their long term goals, they can unintentionally disqualify themselves from borrowing later. Now, this doesn't mean you shouldn't take deductions. It means deductions should be taken intentionally with awareness of what you're optimizing for. Tax planning isn't the same as tax avoidance. So, true planning balances today's tax savings with tomorrow's financial goals. When home ownership is your goal, then that balance is going to matter. So if you step back and look at these three factors together, a pattern starts to emerge. The problem is rarely that entrepreneurs don't make enough money. The problem is that their income, documentation, and structure aren't aligned with how lenders evaluate risk. Homeownership for the self employed is usually a 12 to 24-month strategy that involves aligning your bookkeeping, your tax planning, and your personal goals all in advance. Once those pieces are aligned, then the conversation with lenders changes dramatically. Now, if homeownership is something you want in the future, the best time to think about it is not when you start house shopping, it's when you're filing your tax returns today. This is why year round planning matters. And this is why education around this topic is so important for business owners. So, if this conversation was helpful, follow along for more educational content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next session.